So, key tenets of aging. I don't care whether you're an executive, a parent, an executive, a clinician. In the end, you're trying to balance several forces at one time in individuals. You're obviously going to learn about hormones a lot this weekend. I hope what I can do is paint, what I was told is to paint a broad swatch, to really cast a wide net on systems biology and chemistry and what goes on. So obviously there's a lot of tenets to helping us to age gracefully, right? Because we want to be able to have a healthy lifespan or a health span. Oxidative stress and inflammation. Trying to balance that. Redox poise is key, right? So whether you're looking at chronic kidney disease, which I think is an epidemic, or you're looking at the endothelial dysfunction of somebody that's got cardiovascular disease, oxidative stress is intimately involved in that. Hormone balance, we're going to talk about that. Obviously, I'm going to kind of go from cortisol out and just kind of understand, well, what goes on when just one system kind of gets out of order. Obviously, there's things like stress hormones, sex hormones, glucose and insulin regulation, which I happen to think is still underappreciated, even though half of the population is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. I keep saying, but for all the Lululemon pants that are being sold, and all of the green drinks that are being sold in grocery stores, guess what? Our obesity rate just went up another 2%. We're failing. We're not doing it. It's not working. So we have to figure another way. And that way is to treat the whole person, right? It's to understand weight loss is more than calories in and calories out, and how many steps you do in a given day. I continually see that as a misnomer in the market. Immune imbalances, of course, whether you're talking about mold or Lyme or SIRS, or we're finally appreciating the fact that, wow, this underlying immune system piece is kind of complex. And obviously, we're not going to get to talk about all of this in 90 minutes, or otherwise I have to talk really fast. And I don't want to do that. And then, of course, there's these issues of environmental burden. We don't really even know the true impact of environmental burden. We can talk about it, but honestly, we track 800 different chemicals out of the 85,000 get it pumped into the environment each year. So what do we really know? We kind of know we're in trouble, right? That's what we know. We kind of know we're in trouble. That's about it. And then, of course, there's individuality. There's people that can just take a tremendous amount of allostatic burden, right? They can take on that stress response. In the technical term, allostatic load, before your HP axis switches and changes the response. I spend a lot of time on people looking at sympathetic and parasympathetic balance. I mean, people with excessive sympathetic tone, by default, are going to be pro-inflammatory from the brain down. There's no way to get around that. It is what it is. And you know what's funny? How many people come into your practice with 135/90 blood pressures? Right? 130/90. I'm just a little hypertensive, pre-hypertensive. I'm pre-sick, right? So the point being is, and then heart rate, right? If people have resting heart rates above 62, right, every 4 points above 62 is a 7 to 10% increased risk for cardiometabolic disease. So how many people come into your practice with a resting heart rate above 62? I won't even talk about pH yet. We'll get to pH in a minute. But there's a lot of basic things that I think people miss just by looking at, did I really look at their biometrics closely? What's their morning and night blood pressures? Are they dippers? Are they non-dippers? Where's their heart rate at? What is their sleep like? Because you know what? We can give them all the Tibetan goji berry that's been blessed by monks and picked by virgins and eaten by lemurs and collected by jaguars. And you know what? If we don't get people to sleep at night and chill out a little bit and learn how to balance their life, guess what? We're still going to be selling a lot of Lululemon pants to people that are overweight and struggling with chronic metabolic diseases. And look, my brother was 476 pounds before he died. I love people of all sizes. This has got nothing to do with me picking on anybody. I'm just telling you guys right now. All right? This is about the fact that we got to get going on what we're doing. In hormones, which you're going to learn about this whole weekend. I know the speakers. This is just incredible what Mark and Amy have put together, which, by the way, I forgot to thank you, Mark, for inviting me to come here and talk. So it's really important to understand that you got to start to look at where is the person at? Where are they at? And then make a plan, because you know what the plan usually is? And once again, I've been doing this work 37 years. All right? So I've been doing it for a while. And I had a practice where we did 400 to 600 people a week at one point in Ohio, all doing personalized medicine. So, I mean, I've seen a few people. And continually what comes in is, oh, everybody needs a probiotic, everybody needs a multivitamin, everybody needs vitamin D, everybody needs a fish oil. Okay, then everybody's burned out taking things before you even get to what they need. Start with what they need and then build out from there, because results end up creating momentum, enthusiasm, and loyalty, right? I'm supposed to start the day with all kinds of motivating things, so that's why I'm doing this. I know you guys know all this. Exercise, for example. Wow, I can't believe it. Somebody comes into your office, they go, hey, yeah, I'm 48. I just went through a divorce. I'm 60 pounds overweight. I'm having really tired midday. I need to get 4 quad espressos to get started. I think I'm going to do a Tough Mudder. Okay. Can we start with walking? And honestly, I see this as a huge issue now. I have people come into me in their 50s and 60s that are getting trained by somebody in their 20s, and they're training them as if they're young athletes. And I commonly have people who start getting tachycardic, they get PVCs, they have arrhythmias, they have elevated heart rates at rest. It's a big problem. So just remember, the harder someone exercises isn't just for your athletes. We got a lot of people who train pretty hard nowadays that are just coming to you that are everyday folks already working a 60-hour week. Then they decide to go train hard, which is way harder than a pro athlete who trains 2 hours a day and then spends the rest of the day getting massage, maybe playing some video games, maybe going to get your stretch in, talking to their chef about what they're going to eat, right? They still work hard, though. These guys work hard. Sometimes it's 6, 8 hour days they're putting in. So, it's not like it's easy. But think about the person that's just working a 10-hour grinding day in their profession and then trying to train, right? So just remember, the harder you train, the more you, increase cortisol at baseline, which is going to give people problems. It causes dysglycemia. You get amino acid deficits. You obviously create more stress to your immune system. The harder you train, the more mineral deficit you get. In fact, I see stress fractures all the time, pH imbalances all the time. So these are big issues. And then obviously you can create a catabolic metabolism. Why can't I keep my lean mass on? Lean mass, it is the currency of aging, right? You got to hold on to that lean mass. And one of the biggest struggles is that people end up doing hypocaloric dieting, trying to get those, go one size down. They lose 30% of their mass. 30% of that weight loss is lean muscle mass. And then they find it harder each time to subsequently get results because of it, right? And then the other thing is an increased proneness to injury and decreased metabolic efficiency. So the harder someone exercises, the more you need to engage straightening their chemistry out. It's not the other way around, all right? So it's hard. It's hard on everybody, right? People who just sit and they basically buy, I don't know, you guys, this is crazy, right? Have you seen that new weighted remote control that's a universal remote control that'll control your phone, it controls your TV? It's weighted and has a gyroscope in it, and they actually have a whole program where you can do this and you change your hand while you're watching TV and exercise. Have you guys seen that yet? Doesn't exist, but it's kind of cool. So what about moderate exercise? And believe me, as I've gotten older, when I trained in my teens, collegiate athlete, got injured, became got nationally ranked in powerlifting and bodybuilding, doing all that kind of stuff. What I trained like when I was 20 is not what I do now in my 60th year. Moderate is better for the majority of people. I know it's hard for people to believe that because they want to beat the stress out of themselves when they train. But moderate is better. And why? Improves oxygenation of tissues, helps with blood sugar, helps to restore the HPA axis instead of stress the HPA axis. Then increases bone density and muscle fat and ratios as well. And then reduces fluid retention. Just remember, moderate versus intense. Moderate, good. Intense, I need to do a lot more work to help that person. Immune function and intensity, this is just to show you, this was a really interesting study way back in 2007 that just showed the higher your continuous exercise rate at 55 to 75% of your VO2 max, resulted in longer lasting immune dysfunction. So there's a lot of people that go on bike for 3 hours at a time. You know does anybody come to you that bikes for a couple hours or goes and runs? I mean, I was watching last night, everybody around here running around this place, right? I stopped everybody and asked what their heart rate was just to see if I could help them. Gave them some goji berries. So obviously we're all familiar with the HPA axis. The point being is that obviously we have the medulla and the cortex. The more we activate intensity or the sympathetic nervous system, the more we pump out more adrenaline, noradrenaline. The more insulin resistant we become, the more adrenaline, noradrenaline we pump out, right? So the more insulin, the more adrenaline. Real simple. And everybody goes, but I'm eating gluten-free. Right, but you're still eating 500 grams of carbs a day. It's still, it's gluten-free carbs, but it's still carbs. This was probably one of the best. I mean, I could not believe when this study came out back in 2013. This is Clinics in Endocrinology and Metabolism. And we could spend the whole day talking about this one slide. And in fact, we're just going to devolve from this slide. As free cortisol goes up, and I'm not talking about metabolism of cortisol right now. You're going to learn all about that this weekend. All I'm talking about is the fact is that as free cortisol goes up, this is what's been established. One, growth hormone releasing hormone goes down. So what's our initial thought on that? What's the old anti-aging method of that? Oh, we'll just give growth hormone. Forget about telling people how to chill out so they can restore their growth hormone. Let's just give them growth hormone. Maybe not the right way to do it. The next, and of course IGF-1 will start to drop, of course, until you become insulin resistant. Then you start getting IGF-1 resistant, and you start making too much of it, which of course induces abnormal cell pathology when that happens. So you start developing cancer when that starts to happen. The next thing over here is gonadotropin-releasing hormone gets dysregulated, and now your luteinizing hormone goes down, and estrogen goes down, and testosterone goes down. So I cannot tell you how many people, I'm not allowed to even measure a testosterone on men in the NBA. I'm like, it's against the NBA Players Association rules. I can't do it. But you know what? All I have to do is look at their prolactin and look at their estrogen, and I pretty much know where their testosterone is because their prolactin is going to go through the roof as their gonadotropin-releasing hormone goes down. Now, they may have an adenoma. You got to send them for that, right? If it's really high, you got to check all that out. I understand that. But I'm just saying in general, what you see in a lot of overtrained individuals are just people as they're aging, as you'll start to see this trend. Are you seeing more prolactins that are out of range? I'm sure you are, so I certainly am. And then the next thing, of course, is that insulin action goes down. This is obvious. You need insulin action to go down, and you can't fight a white tiger. The problem is the white tiger isn't email. It's not the fact the Uber driver missed picking you up. That's not a white tiger. That's an event. But it's not a stressful event. But we have a primitive nervous system, right? So that primitive nervous system ends up driving insulin action down, blood pressure goes up, we start to get more visceral fat, but the most interesting thing is the global outcome at the bottom, which talks about the fact that we be at osteopenic, which now 3 in 10 cases of osteoporosis are men, right? Well, of course, they're on PPIs and they have low testosterone, right? And they eat a high acidic diet. Go ketogenic, man, right? And then, of course, what happens? They're going to lose bone. Osteopenic, sarcopenic, syndrome X, cognitive decline, immunologic compromise, leading to fractures, frailties, cardiovascular disease, memory loss, and infectious complications. See, I really feel like we can't get out of our own way with stress, because how many of you walk into your house at night and don't turn on your lights? I'm not saying that you should, because you'll probably fall over something. But what I'm saying is that by default in modern living, I remember when I moved out into the darkest state of a 5-state area for 10 years. I actually kind of semi-retired at 29. Lived out on a farm, and which I thought, this is going to be awesome. And 10 years later, figured out it was kind of, but had to get out. So, but the point being was, going crazy. That's when I wrote 10 books. That was the first 10 books I wrote. Then I had 10 more to get out, but that was the first 10. But the point being was, it took me 6 months to adjust to darkness and no lights and no noise and not a million things going on. It was beautiful after 6 months. I mean, I was, holy cow, man, this is amazing. I gotta learn to live like this forever. I gotta keep my nervous system here, right? But the problem is, I think for most people, disturbances in cortisol and maladaptation is just kind of an innate thing in our modern living. And so therefore, we see these downstream effects of osteopenia, cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, cognitive decline. How many people come to you in their 40s and they're already saying they're short-term memory shot? I always say, my term, it's very technical. I ask them this very technical thing. I say, do you feel like you're pushing a thought through Jell-O? Yeah. Stress hormones are supposed to go up in the morning and down at night. That's the other thing we have problems with. So not only are we supposed to have stress hormones go like this, but all of our hormones work like this. If we're familiar with Chinese medicine, we know, wow, Shen cycles are important. Everything moves in a cycle. Everything moves in a rhythm. We're supposed to be having hormones go off at certain points of the day. Maybe we're supposed to eat at certain points of the day. We're not going to talk about things like time-restricted eating, which I think is amazing. My Italian grandma used to say, Jimmy, just 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, time-restricted eating. I try to get people to understand, let's start real simple. Let's try fasting between meals. It's trying to get you guys ready for the day. Just trying to get you guys fired up. But it's true. I mean, honestly, think how physical most people are in the course of their day. How much do they really need to eat? The average farmer in the 1860s ate 1.5 meals a day. I mean, but that's, of course, when you go and see the little Levi's that they used to wear back in the 1870s at the Smithsonian, and it looks like your kid's wearing them. That was the adult. So, we are a well-fed stock these days. The big thing I think is interesting here, of course, is if you look at this, you think about these Shen cycles and think about psychogenic repair and the fact that, the more stress you get under, the more we disturb our neural repair, right? So we can never get back to that parasympathetic tone because we don't restore our dopaminergic beds, we don't restore our serotonergic beds, we don't restore our noradrenergic beds. So people end up either tired and wired or tired and flat. And if they've got a D2-allele1 gene SNP, they start craving like crazy. And if they crave like crazy and they eat a bunch of food and they end up, with a BMI of 40 and we do bariatric surgery and they can't eat like crazy anymore, what do? They become alcoholics, right? So if we don't correct the dopamine, we don't correct the source of the problem, we don't look at the circuit where it starts, you never really get to the correction of the individual. And that's what I think this weekend, is about, is how do we start to look at correcting biocircuitry? How do we look at systems and go, okay, this is where it's broke, right? So it's important to understand, we as humans, nobody here got in last night and was like, hey, I got to stay up all night. I'm going to go out and look for some bugs, right? And everybody's here not hanging inside a cave and turning out all the lights. So we are not night beings. We are day beings. And when people say, oh, I'm a night person, oh, really? You're that messed up? Okay. I say in a nice way. Come on. You can tell I'm really gentle. And these are simple things. Obviously, hey, as I get under stress, my serotonin goes down, I start to crave. I find it refreshing if I really explain to somebody why they're craving, because people fail diets because they can't stop craving. Now, why would somebody who doesn't, and I'm not in favor of these, but whether they do ketogenic or Atkins or any kind of low-carb diet where they drop a bunch of weight, right? And we know that's going to screw with their insulin receptors in the end, and they're going to gain weight back. I'm not saying anything about that, but the bottom line is, once you lost the 60 pounds and you feel amazing, and they come in and tell you how amazing they feel, then they come back the next time and they're 70 pounds heavier, it's not rational. And that's because when you have craving patterns or you have deficits, dopaminergic deficits, reward, hedonic urge is always going to take over, right? So these are basic, but I think that, to my point, 50% of the population's insulin resistant or diabetic. We've got a 40% obesity rate. We are not even getting these basic pathways straightened out of why are you craving? Why do you overeat? Right? And that's it starts with stress response, guys. It just starts with stress. I can tell you right now, I dip people in theanine. I smatter them with magnolia. I blast them with holy basil. I give them melatonin until I pound them into submission. And once again, I'm a gentle guy. You can tell my Italianness, right? I'm so gentle with people. But no, I really do. I have I have to create a change in their nervous system. And it all starts from understanding cortisol metabolism and then going downward from there, and understanding the relationship to neurochemical balance, hedonic urge, and stress response, so that you're able to actually create an effective change. I've done weight loss now in 400,000 people because we did the weight loss programs for Lifetime Fitness and developed them all. And we actually had pretty good success level with keeping people at their goal weight for over a year, which is pretty rare, right? And we did it not because we were teaching them how to eat and how to exercise more. It was because we were teaching them how to manage their stress and what nutrients do you take to balance your dopamine and serotonin and keep, by the way, your adrenaline and noradrenaline at a decent level where you can focus and stay concentrating in your day, which is the other thing that people complain about. Why circadian rhythm so important? Obviously, I'm big into understanding circadian rhythms in people because circadian rhythm has a lot to do with what happens as it gets disrupted, what happens to your health. And so when you look at this, just on the flattening of the cortisol curve, not to mention disrupted growth hormone secretion, obviously, as soon as your sleep gets disturbed because your cortisol rhythm gets disturbed, your insulin beta cells don't work. So as soon as you don't make enough melatonin at night and you're not sleeping enough, do you have anybody at all in your practice that says they don't sleep enough? I'm not sure if you have anybody. I mean, once in a while I get one. But as soon as your melatonin is not adequate at night, it disrupts the circadian beta cell response for insulin signaling for the next day. You understand how important that is? So I'm just going to ask, because we're here, everybody's enlightened up here. Whenever I'm coming, I'm from Pittsburgh, moved to California, but when I come to Oregon, it's like, seriously, I love Oregon, right? So I know everybody's going to answer that they do this when I ask this question, so I just want to raise hands. How many people got 8 hours of restful sleep last night, woke up, felt refreshed, and just feel amazing right now? Just raise your hand. Raise your hand really high. Wait, is this working? Is it working? It's not working. Okay. I got a couple people that are feeling amazing and sleeping. And we're in Portland where we're at a health, am I in the pipe fitters union talk? Where am I? My point is, if you're not sleeping well, neither are your patients. And if you don't think it's important enough to get to sleep, it's not going to be important enough to them. And if you don't get people to sleep, forget about all the other stuff you're doing. You got to work it, all right? I'm very basic. I'll tell you, I've been very complex in my practice in the past, and now it's kind of weird. After almost 40 years of being in practice, I just try to hammer these basic things home with people, and it works when you understand the physiology of why it's so important. And I know I don't have a lot of time to go through all of it, so we got to keep moving. Why is flattening of the cortisol curve so important? Basically, because I upregulate interleukin-6 centrally in the brain. And as soon as I upregulate interleukin-6, that's going to cause, you've heard the centralized fatigue theory for your brain, how your brain starts to feel foggy and gluey and can't think. It's because of an inflammatory cytokine storm. It's neuroinflammation. Whether it's a vector that causes the neuroinflammation, it could be a vector, right? It could be Lyme, it could be mold, whatever you want to do, biotoxins. It could be something like iron, like a metallic toxin, arsenic, mercury, MPTP, right? If you think about Parkinson's and gasoline additives. It could be endotoxin, circulating endotoxin, right? Hey, I'm a marathon runner. Very cool. But all the blood's getting shunted from my gut, and I'm making a bunch of circulating endotoxin, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier, triggers my microglial cells to trigger IL-6, right? So it doesn't matter. In the end, we start to trigger inflammatory cytokines and increased oxidative burden, which then causes a decrease in neurogenesis, dendritic retraction, right? And when I go back, can I go back? I can't go back. Let's go back to here. You see how a decrease in neurogenesis is on this? That's why it occurs, because I have a centralized effect of a neuroinflammatory response, which decreases my neuroregenerative capacity. My progenitor cells or stem cells in my brain cannot fully mature to fully pruned dendritic cells. And that's why people, by the time they hit 40, go, oh, I'm kind of thick and pushing thoughts through jello. Because there's no neuronal renewal, guys. And there's chronic inflammatory processes and hippocampal volume changes that are causing damage to your memory centers, right? I mean, I can't get all this in 90 minutes, but I'm going to try. Try really hard. Diurnal physical performance changing in aging males. I just had to put this up because I think it's pretty crazy. Middle-aged men measured AM and night cortisols, tracked for 20 years to the time they were 65 to 83 years old. Outcomes were measured at walking speed and balance and time morning serum of the 4 salivary campuses. So they timed them. Worse performance in people with poor morning cortisol response and less nocturnal decline. Flattening of the cortisol curve, CNS alteration. What do we worry about in elderly people? Are they going to fall? One of the hardest things is the fact that as we age, we lose our neurologic sensitivity, right? Our three-dimensional sensitivity for where we put our foot changes. So the hotter you run your nervous system, the more the circuits fry. Let's just put it in talk you can talk to your patient about, right? You can talk to your patient about, it's kind of like a circuit breaker box. You keep running too much electricity through that circuit breaker box, what happens? The breaker box blows a fuse. When the fuse blows, now I'm not able to function as effectively. I don't have good three-dimensional awareness. I don't just see this in 60-year-olds. I got 27-year-old, athletes being paid a lot of money. That they're like, I can't get to the puck. I can see it. I know I'm supposed to be there, but I miss. Corvette race team. We don't know why we keep wrecking cars. So they brought us in. We evaluated them. It's like, it's easy. Your guys' chemistries are really messed up. And you're sympathetic dominant, and you've lost your reflexes, and your spatial awareness is off. So we corrected them, gave them a Heidelberg capsule, have them swallow it, looked at their core body temperature when they were running around the track at 180 miles an hour after we sprayed them with theanine when they got out of the car. So we did a liposomal theanine to get out of the car, and then we gave them an intranasal ginseng with nicotinamide riboside when they got in the car, and guess what happened to their core body temperature? Nothing changed. And they didn't wreck cars, and they won Le Mans. See, we can all do that as we age. We can keep our nervous systems intact. All right? But you have to play by the rules. And the rules are, starting with, obviously in this room, getting more sleep. That's a real basic rule. It's real simple. I used to think, I remember when I thought I could cheat that. I don't cheat it anymore, I can tell you that. I've spent quite a while reconditioning. 2010 study on 183 male athletes, age 61, severe testosterone deficiency in 12%. Severe means out of range, mildly deficient, barely in range. And those over 70, they had a severe deficiency at 28%, mild deficiency at 26%. Basically, in aging males, testosterone, especially the harder you've worked out, the more you have gonadal failure. So we see it all the time in men. I've got 30-year-old athletes with testosterones at 200. So if I'm so fit, why is my testosterone so low? Well, it's obviously we get the breakdown of your gut. Your anabolic drive goes down as your cortisol goes up. I kind of talked about that. Cortisol to testosterone ratios go off. This just isn't for men, by the way. Women, it is also associated of cortisol to free testosterone ratios, and you can think of it in quartiles. So if you're in the third or fourth quartile with your cortisol and in the first quartile with your free testosterone, you're more prone for injury. Man or woman, that's how we evaluate an athlete, as we look at cortisol to testosterone ratios. How does cortisol throw off testosterone? So just real quick, cortisol blocks T4 to T3 conversion. We know that, right? Reverse T3 goes up. Thyroid releasing hormones upregulated to create more T4. The increase in TRH increases prolactin. Remember I said you see the prolactin go up. It downregulates LH and FSH, which downregulates testosterone and growth hormone. So that's the mechanism. Thyroid releasing hormone, upregulated, downregulates testosterone, upregulates prolactin. That's why I can see high prolactins in people. And what does that tell me? Is it stress-induced, right? I pretty much can tell when a high prolactin is it's stress-induced because I know it's got to be cortisol that's causing that to happen most likely, and I'll look at that. And now if you're looking at it in a more elegant way, like what Mark does and what Dutch does, you're looking at cortisol and cortisone, and you're looking at ratios and seeing what they're doing and how much they're converting, and that's all fine. It's another topic I'm not going to get into. But this, once again, I'm big on networks. I kind of look at everything as a triad. So I kind of look at things in buckets. When I talk to my patients, I give them 5 buckets. I give them the thyroid, adrenal, pancreas bucket, the gut, immune, brain bucket, the cardiopulmonary, neurovascular bucket, liver, lymph, kidney bucket, and the sex hormone bucket. Here, all of your symptoms and all of your labs fall into one of those 5 buckets. It's like 5-element theory, kind of, but in a Western way. Weird. So obviously these kind of things are happening now. For sure, it's more than just selenium causing a conversion to T4 to T3. There's a lot of other factors, right? When people have low ferritin, their T3 doesn't bind, so that's a problem. 7-keto DHEA, so as your DHEA pool goes down, which is of course really important neuroprotection-wise, right? Forget about all the other things they're saying it protects now, just the brain. When you have low 7-keto DHEA, your conversion is poor. So there's several things that cause this, but the fact is that your body is cutting down your thyroid for a reason when your cortisol's up. It isn't, oh, your T3's low, your free T3's low. I'm going to give you T3. Oh, okay. How many times have you seen this? And you guys have done it. I've seen it. I mean, I've had clinics where I've had 3-4 docs at a time. We're giving stuff to people. You give them thyroid hormone, and their free T3 doesn't move. And in fact, it went down a little. You see it all the time, right? Why? It's because your body is countermeasuring you. It's saying, oh no, I'm going to bind you up with thyroid binding globulin because we can't have your heart rate going up any higher than it already is because it's already going out of control. So it's the natural countermeasure, right? Your body works. The thing I learned in pharmacy school, and it was great. I went back in pharmacy school. We weren't even allowed to use calculators. We had slide rules back when I went to school. And I'm not kidding. We were not allowed to use a calculator. But what we learned, we really learned receptor activation, receptor antagonism, right? And countermeasure and measure and what happens. And so what we do too often, what I think, is we look at something and go, oh, that's low. I better make that go high. Oh, that's high. I better make that go low. And we're guilty of it, whether we're using natural therapies or allopathic therapies, right? I mean, I'm just saying we tend to do that. And then what we really need to do is start to really try to determine, well, why? Why is that source cause such a problem? You know, lipids are a great example. Don't lower lipids for the sake of lowering lipids. You should be lowering lipids because you understand that the very first sign of metaflammation, metabolic inflammation, that hot term in 2019, metaflammation. Papers are being published on it, guys. And inflammation aging, right? Metaflammation and inflammation, the hot topics. So the big thing to understand is the very first sign of metabolic inflammation, you know, that low-grade inflammation that you're not detecting, are bad actor lipids. So apolipoprotein B, oxidized LDL, elevated fibrinogen, LPA elevates. Those are the signs that there's something wrong. It doesn't mean, and look, it's interesting, the population I've got with, you know, ex-athletes, I see a lot of people on statins, and their cholesterol's good and low, but their oxidized LDL is still elevated, and their fibrinogen is still up, and their myeloperoxidase is still elevated, and their deoxyguanosine is still elevated. So they still have all kinds of metabolic damage going on, and they have a lot of lipid membrane damage going on, but why, right? It's because of metabolic inflammation, which is typically caused by what? Stress, environment, genetic individuation, genomic expression, you know, what drug therapies has somebody been on, what kind of stress load are they under in terms of their workload, what kind of history of antibiotics have they got, all those things that we bucket into exposure versus what we do to ourselves ends up inducing metabolic inflammation, which ends up inducing these things like dyslipidemias, you know, changes in cortisol, changes in thyroid, changes in gut permeability, right? It's just understanding that just because this is down doesn't mean you make it go up. Try to correct the cortisol first. What one thing that happens in a 24-hour day, circadian rhythm, elevates thyroid binding globulin? What's the one thing that elevates thyroid binding globulin? For sure, no matter what, an act that everybody does or doesn't do enough of at night on a pillow. Could I give you another hint? Jeopardy's almost over. Right? Sleep. The less you sleep, the more thyroid binding globulin you make. It's simple. And therefore, between stress response and thyroid binding globulin, due to poor sleep, no wonder we're dealing with thyroids all the time where people were hypothyrotic and they're not burning their carnitine-palmitoyl transferases off. Oh, okay. I can give you all kinds of enzyme names. I'm real good at it. I'm just telling you. We can think about the minute, but unless you start to get to the source of big, driving, leveraging positions in this person's chemistry, you're not going to get anywhere. All you're going to do is give a person another food allergy kit. Oh, we're going to do another GI map, right? And they're going to continue to be dysbiotic, and they're going to continue to be leaky, and you're going to continue to give them lots of glutamine. And look, which we all need to do those things to get people to get well. I agree. I do it. But I need to get them doing things with a purpose. And that's what I think is cool about everybody that's speaking here. I know a lot of the speakers in IAN. I mean, you're going to get a treat listening to IAN. You got so many people that are talented. I think I'm going the wrong way again. Here we go. Stress and thyroid antibodies. Interestingly, reduced corticosteroid activity associated with increased prevalence of thyroid antibodies. Also interesting, lipopolysaccharide. So if you're familiar with circulating endotoxin lipopolysaccharide, it's kind of the new darling of why thyroid antibodies get upregulated. That with circulating endotoxin is probably the signal that really starts to trigger inflammation in the thyroid. Now, obviously, there could be other triggers like Epstein-Barr or just, the gut in general, but lipopolysaccharide's a biggie. So, and obviously you have to think about competition. So, we have to think about, things like tyrosine and cortisol and thyroid are competing for tyrosine. And is there enough tyrosine on board? And then there's a lot of things that I think we just forget. So just remember, as people get under stress and their thyroid goes low, they're not going to absorb nutrients well. It's very common for me to see people who are borderline anemic. They're macrocytic, normochromic, or they're microcytic, hypochromic, or I love this, they're almost hypochromic, right? They're just 1 point away, just a tenth away from being hypochromic. But yet they have every symptom of being anemic, right? So very, very commonly. So big issues. The biggest one for me, of course, is that about 20% of your insulin receptors won't fire. They won't come to the surface and express when you're low thyroid. So thyroid hormones dictate insulin receptors. In fact, thyroid hormones dictate a lot of receptors. They dictate your dopamine receptors, and they dictate your serotonin receptors and your GABA receptors. So thyroid hormone is real. That's why when they gave thyroid hormone, they gave T3 to people that were on antidepressants. They had a lower rate of recidivism and falling back into their depression. It's because they actually got that serotonergic receptor to fire, right? I'm not saying that's the way to go. Like, I'm not a huge believer in antidepressants in general, but I'm just saying that in that model, it showed an improvement. Cardiac performance altered in low thyroid states. You get changes in cardiac output, stroke volume, and end diastolic volume at rest. Well, this is what we see all the time in people. They end up with an enlarged left ventricle, right? They get an enlarged heart because they've been working out really hard. Their heart rate's gone up. They've become subclinical hypothyroid. Their T3 goes low, and now their left ventricle has to enlarge in order to take care of the workload that they've got, right? That happens in people that aren't athletes when they sustain low T3 over a long period of time because they're not sleeping. Same thing happens, right? There's non-athletes that end up with an enlarged heart that take a look at what their chemistry looks like. And a 2005 study, this is interesting, compared to hormone levels of 45, 70, and 90%, this was interesting, the higher the heart rate, the lower the T3 went. So remember I said when you start to train intense, all the wheels come off the cart? This is one of the examples of how the wheels come off the cart. The higher you take your heart rate, the more you suppress your T3. And the more you train hard all the time, the more your T3 stays suppressed. And when your T3 stays suppressed, I'm not going to express my insulin receptors. I'm not going to get my serotonin and dopamine receptors to move. I'm not going to burn fat the way I should. Right? So interesting. And these are just more kind of like, just once again, I didn't used to worry about talking to people about overtraining, but there are so many people that think they're athletes. And I'm going to tell you something. You know the difference between you and a real athlete? Maybe one of you in the office out here was a former, professional athlete, so you're out of it, all right? Everybody else, it isn't about how you look. Because I can line up, I talked to the Junior Olympic team. I'll line up 10 people. They all look like skiers, right? They're long, got it all going on, right? Look really good in those onesies, whatever they are. They call them things they wear, ski suits or whatever they are. Well, that's great. Who wins? Who wins out of the 10 beautiful bodies? I asked, because I'm around these NFL Hall of Fame guys, and they come in all sizes, right? You look at one guy and you go, you played football, and you're a Hall of Famer. I mean, you played good enough and long enough. There's only 180 of them living. I mean, it's not that easy to be that, right? Very exclusive. The guy that goes down to ski, guy or girl, it's the one that makes the decision 4 gates ahead where they need to be and makes a counter correction 4 gates up. So their nervous system responds so fast that they're able to react. So it's not about getting from point A to point B. It's how fast you decide. That's what separates you. Now, how does that separate us when we're exercising? They have nervous systems that are much more pliable. They have more plasticity, more recovery. We don't, so we shouldn't train like them because they can recover and we don't. And that's why if you read a book, cool book came out called Haywire Heart. I'm not kidding. This is not a little thing going on. Haywire Heart. It's about people overtraining and ending up in cardiac conditions, right? This is not about athletes. This is about everybody here. How many people got up this morning and exercised? Raise your hand. Oh, boy. We're not in a very, okay. Never mind. How many people overtrained this morning? Raise your hand. Bottom line, exercise, higher cortisol, testosterone and cortisol is correlated to strength gains. That's for both men and women. Interesting, we can get past that. One herb that's really good for that, uricoma for men and women. Uricoma longifolia, right? Uricoma longifolia is phenomenal for improving testosterone, free testosterone to cortisol ratios. And they've shown it in women and in men. So it's a really interesting herb, and it's because it's an adaptogen, right? And it's a centrally acting adaptogen because it alters luteinizing hormone and improves sex hormone binding globulin. And in fact, adaptogens are all centrally acting, right? It's not like you're taking ashwagandha and it selectively goes to your adrenal glands. It doesn't at all, right? It's acting at your brain, right? Adaptogens work at your brain to alter the HPA axis and unload your allostatic burden, right? So, but uricoma specifically is really good for testosterone to cortisol. If you want to know dosing, 300 to 600 milligrams a day. As little as 100 milligrams have been shown in studies, but really, I haven't seen things work really that great under 300 milligrams a day. If you are looking for a branded, like the standardized extract all the studies were on, I have nothing to do with them. I don't get a single penny. It's called Longjack, right? Longjack is the brand, Lonjack. That's the LJ100 is the branded ingredient that has been studied. But I have nothing to do with it, no financial gain from it, just giving you the name of the one that works. C-reactive protein, very important to understand. Higher the C-reactive protein, the higher the incidence of atrial fibrillation. Interesting. A lot of my aging athletes have a way higher incidence of atrial fib. It's crazy. And then, of course, endurance training raises CRP and IL-6. That's why we got to look out for it. And remember, if somebody's CRP is above 1, that's another checkbox for that metaflammation process going on, right? Anything above 1, and that metaflammation, another checkbox. So if you had to think about it, the way I think of things is, it's one thing if somebody had a blood sugar at 95, right? If I got a blood sugar at 95, what's my relative risk of being diabetic in the next decade? What's the relative risk? 6% for every point over 84, right? That's Kaiser Permanente, 46,578 lives studied over a decade, right? They looked at that. Relative risk 6% for every point over 84. I kind of like looking at those things because I build models. Like I do build a lot of algorithms looking at this. So that's one thing if it's a 95. But what if you have that person that has a 95 blood sugar, 60% risk of being diabetic, an 18 fasting insulin, a CRP of 3, a GFR of 65, a blood pressure of 135 over 90, an ox LDL of 100, a LDL to HDL ratio of 6:1. Okay, you see what I mean? Progression. It's about progression and creating that constellation of how far along is this person into that metabolic inflammatory response that's causing them to accelerate their aging, and then depending on what their genetics play out, right, which tissues gets damaged and what disease they present. That's all it is. It's I don't know, I think it's kind of straightforward, right? What's the load? What's our load? And where are we expressing it? If we're HLA haplotypes, right? If we're HLA, all of a sudden I become an autoimmune case, or I become prone to mold. If we're at ApoE34 or 4,4 and we're eating the wrong foods and under a lot of stress, I start getting coronary plaque or soft plaque, right? So there's all those things. Or if my stress response is high, I've lost my serotonergic drive in my gut. Now all of a sudden I'm an IBS, IBD, and colitis case, right? So it's just, I think it's important for us to look at things as, what are all they presenting in front of me? Where do the labs line up and create the stress, right? And I do a lot of work with microglial cells. I really look at the microglia because this is where it's at. It is the immune cells of the CNS. And you can't get away with, it's a key component to neuroinflammation. We started looking at this. I had a spectrum disorder clinic in Ohio when I had a clinic in Ohio 15 years ago. And that was part of our overall institute. And we're always looking for how can we get something to downregulate microglial cells. And then, of course, it's activated in response to neural injury. Interestingly, when you hit your head and get a TBI, say you're in a wreck, you're not an athlete, you're just in a wreck, and you get a TBI. How long does it take for your gut to create a problem from that TBI? How long does your brain and your gut take to interface and create a leaky gut? An actual leaky permeability change in your gut due to a head trauma. It takes about 10 minutes. In about 10 minutes, you go from a leaky brain, right, a TBI, an inflammatory brain, to an immediate leaky gut. That paper just came out about 4 months ago, so it's relatively new. So, but the point being is, I can't have an injured brain. That's why we call it gut immune brain, right? I can't have a leaky brain without a leaky gut. And typically, I'm not going to have a leaky gut without a neurally inflamed brain. It's kind of hard because you have the enteric nervous system, right? The enterochromaffin cells are communicating all the time in that enteric nervous system between the brain and the gut. So just important to understand. So microglial activates, what's that mean? It can be due to injury. That injury could be psychogenic. It could be physical trauma. It could be biochemical trauma, right? It could be any of those. Vaccine damage for some subpopulations, right? It could be a leaky gut due to excessive antibiotic use, right? There could be any number of things that could cause that damage. But in the end, the glial cells get activated when we increase inflammatory elements in the brain, which then causes your nervous system to be basically destroyed. You get neuronal death. So think about neonates whose mothers are neurally inflamed. Wow, I wonder why we're having so many problems now. Honestly, I hate to say it, back when I was young, but back when I was young, giving kids antidepressants and kids having to be on, drugs for GERD, going through school in 1965, it was pretty rare. You thought, oh my God, that kid's sick. They have to be given medicine. Now, if you don't get something while you're in class, people think there's something wrong. You don't need anything, right? It's kind of sad. So if you look at neuroinflammation, this is basically, just to be a little more granular, what happens when microglial cells get activated. You upregulate PGE2, IL-1, TNF-alpha, all of the free radicals like the peroxyl nitrite free radicals, peroxide, superoxide, hydrogen peroxide radicals, which all lead to neuronal death. The problem with that is that as that neuronal death occurs, you trigger more microglial cell activity because you start to release laminin and neurolaminin and alpha-synuclein. And so it's a cyclic thing that occurs. So until you stop it, it keeps going. And don't you see that with a lot of people? I mean, a lot of people are just complaining, hey, man, I'm just not sharp. And I'm going to ask another question, just because I feel like I have to. Because if it's not happening here, it's not happening anywhere, right? Bastion of health. And I'm not kidding. I mean, I think of this as I used to come up here for club sport and would teach for club sport. So I know the community here, people are very engaged in their health. How many of you feel like your brain is gymnastic and sharp, you're able to focus through your day, and feel like your brain is as effective as it should be for your age, for the learning that you want to do? How many people feel great about their brain? Let's put it that way. Raise your hand really high. All right. I got, I'm just going to get some life insurance for a lot of you guys. This crowd's starting to worry me. I could make a lot of money. But I had a handful of you. More people than people that raise their hand for sleep. For those of you that had your hand up and you say you're thinking really good, get some sleep so you'll keep thinking smart. Right? So, sustained release of inflammatory mediators, the blood-brain barrier becomes permeable, of course, enters the brain space, encounters neurons and the glial cells, and the glial cells express major histocompatibility complex compounds, which then, of course, create damage. And this, of course, results in chronic inflammation and upregulation. I spend a lot of time cooling down people's brains. Because when I cool their brains down, I can correct their cortisol and their cortisone, and I can correct their thyroid hormone, and I can correct their leaky gut. Because, oh, your gut's leaky. We're going to have to do a food elimination plan on you. Well, you'll be eliminating food on them forever if they're under a lot of stress and not sleeping. You're never going to get to it. You're just going to always be taking away. Don't you feel like the diets we're doing for people today more and more are just diets that take things away? Oh, I'm going to put you on a modified FODMAP diet. Only foods that begin with G. Why? I don't know. I have out of ideas. But honestly, I mean, guys, people were living on Wonder Bread and apple pie in the 1950s, and we did not have the diseases we have now. I know, and I realize glyphosates, environmental burden, I got it. I'm not, we can make complex arguments about why that's happened. I understand. But the bottom line is, we're the problem. Our immune systems need re-regulated, and we need to do it from the top down. All right? Remember when Wonder Bread originally had purple and blue and yellow dots, and then they went to orange and red? Do you remember when Wonder Bread had purple and blue and orange? And then they went, like in the 60s, it went to yellow and red. That's when they started using hybridized grain. Another lie, but it sounds really good. But they told me to get up here and get you guys ready for the day. I'm sorry. I'm pulling out all my stops. I can't help it. This is that whole thing about adult neurogenesis. Very simply, if you look at these radial glia-like stem cells to the progenitor cell, when you have elevated cortisol or elevated or excessive NMDA, so the calcium bridge breakage that occurs through neuroexcitatory activity and NMDA, this progenitor cell never progresses because there's receptors for NMDA and cortisol on it, and it prevents the budding of the glial cell, the stem cell, to a fully matured dendritic cell. Okay? So when I live under high stress and I have high glutaminergic drive, i.e. I can't sleep, it's either glutamate or histamine, guys, right? I'm basically telling my body, hey, Don't worry about regenerating neurons. We got plenty of them in our brain, which of course is a fallacy, right? That's why people have problems. And I've already kind of talked about this, stress interfering with all stages of neuronal renewal. This is interesting. Lasting inhibition of adult neurogenesis occurs after the initial stressor despite later normalization of cortisol. Why did I put this slide in here? Not to depress you. It means that you have to do more than balance cortisol to correct neurogenesis. You're going to have to replace phospholipids, right? You're going to have to make sure their thyroid is in balance. You're going to have to make sure their gut is no longer leaky so they're not getting circulating endotoxins to their brain. You have to do a complete job of repairing the individual. It's not just about getting their cortisol to correct. That's the start. You have to repair. And you can't repair with a bunch of damaged lipids. So if their myeloperoxidase is high, if their deoxyguanosine is high, if their oxidized L is high, if you're looking at anti-cardiolipin antibodies, if they're high, you know that that cell membrane's getting damaged, right? You have to get that to get calmed down so that you get neuronal and cell membrane repair, all right? So it's more than just, oh, if I just correct cortisol, that's going to correct all this now. No, it's not. It's the start. The only reason I picked cortisol is it's a great compound, a central compound for you to understand, and I think Dutch does a phenomenal job at kind of displaying and looking at what happens as it perturbates into the system incorrectly. But it's the start point, guys. You got to go upstream, and you got to understand how to correct people. So phospholipids, I don't care whether you use liquid phosphatidylcholine, ethanolamines, or you want to use powdered ones, right? But you need mixed phospholipids for people. Where might you think it doesn't? You can't do that. Probably people with really elevated TMAO. If you got people that have really super high TMAO, they can't do a lot of choline until you correct the dysbiotic flora in their gut. Then you can give them the choline. But that still fits in our model, right? Our model is, hey, once I get that cortisol normalized, I still got to fix the gut. I got to think about phospholipids. But I probably would look at TMAO because I don't want to pump a bunch of phospholipids in somebody and upregulate their dysbiotic flora and their TMAO. I want to get that down, and then I can pump in the phospholipids. If their TMAO is low, I can just start hitting them with phospholipids, a couple teaspoons a day, up to a tablespoon twice a day if you'd like, of a liquid phospholipid. Or if we're using a powder, the scoops are about a quarter teaspoon, I think. You know, I usually give people 2 scoops twice a day. I load them with a lot of phospholipids. Nobody's eating organ meats these days, right? Last night I could not find any heart or kidney anywhere. I looked all over and I thought, my God, there's no heart or kidney? Maybe if I went downtown to Ox, I don't know if you guys know the restaurant Ox in Portland, but very carnivorous place. Maybe they have heart and kidney. Interesting, when I was in Vietnam and I was lecturing, and at 2 a.m. when they finally decide to shut you down and they want you to stop going to karaoke, that's the truth. They take you to the middle of this market, and the soups they give you have organ meats in them, like kidney and heart, along with a very hot broth, which makes sense, right? Because it's very restorative, right? That's why we give gland extracts, to get all those signal substances from those glands, right? So anyway, interesting stuff. Hippocampal changes in chronic stress, right? The more stress I get under, the hippocampus swells, and after it swells for long enough, then it retracts, and when it retracts, guess what? Short-term memory loss. And you get dendritic retraction relatively quickly under chronic stress. And people with PTSD, depression, have volume loss. But I think you can gain that volume back if we just get back on it. Dendritic retraction, this is basically what I'm talking about, is the fact that with increased oxidative stress, and if you think of the term excitotoxicity, right, or neuroexcitotoxicity, with either of those, I get dendritic retraction, which means I'm not going to be thinking as sharply. But you guys have seen this in people you've worked with. They come back to you and they go, my God, you're a miracle worker. I love you. Here, I'm just going to bring you some gluten-free muffins. I just ate 8 of them. I did bring you a dozen, but I was kind of hungry on the way. Because they said, I got my brain back. You gave them their brain back, and you did, because you stopped the neuroexcitation, you stopped the oxidative burden, you stopped the glutamate, NMDA, cortisolergic drive into their brain inflammatory response, and now they feel better. and they think clearer. They're not gooey-brained. They're not pushing a thought through jello, which is what people most identify with. And of course, hippocampus alterations in both structure and function been identified with long-term stress. Of course, that's why we have to manage our stress better, sleep better, understand cortisol better. And then this is super important. I mean, I love this. This is the simplest slide because it just says what's important about cholinergic activity, meaning making sure people have enough choline. We did a little study at my institute in Ohio. We did it. We tagged people. We had 10 people cross-match, 5 males, 5 females, all having problems with cognitive function. And we scanned their brains. And we did a tracer with diazepam. So it was a benzodiazepam marker. And what we were doing, we were looking at glutamate to acetylcholine ratios to find out, well, what's going on in a 55 to 7-year-old. And one intervention in 4 weeks. All right, so we measured them, did basically a memory scale on them. One intervention in 4 weeks, I gave them phospholipids for 4 weeks, and we retraced their brain. Guess what happened? In 4 weeks, choline in the brain, I don't think using a functional MR is that easy to fool, right? Choline went up, glutamate went down. 8 out of 10 people reported improved cognition and their memory scale improved. Wow. That's when I understood the power of just something, once again, simple. Get choline back. Now, would I modify that today because I did that 15 years ago? Sure, I would. Because I would at least look for TMAO and decide whether I should give them choline first or correct their gut first, right? That'd be it. But if you look here, vagus nerve stimulation is anti-inflammatory. So the better my vagal tone, right, the better my resting heart rate, the better my recovery from exercise heart rate, right? My heart rate recovery, at least 10 beats per minute when you stop exercise, the better my recovery rate, the better I'm tolerogenic to my immune response. I don't trigger inflammatory response. You see down here? Immune homeostasis. I'm tolerogenic as long as I have vagal tone stimulation. As I lose cholinergic tone, and remember, you need acetylcholine to release growth hormone. You need acetylcholine. That's your RAM, right, for your brain. I mean, you need it. As I lose cholinergic tone, as I lose vagal tone, in this case, they did a vagotomy, but as I lose my cholinergic tone, I create a pro-inflammatory stance from my brain down. So why is it important that you manage cortisol? Because my central nervous system, my sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are dependent on it. If you're not looking at blood pressure seriously morning and night, if you're not looking at heart rate, if you're not understanding that person's stress, you're not understanding their sleep pattern, are they feeling overcommitted during the day? Do they perseverate? Are they a list maker? Are they craving carbs? Are they not just craving food, but they can't stop? Or the first thing they say is, oh, I love food. I don't know if I could take that out. No, these are words that are powerful because they tell you where they're at. That's what you have to think about, okay? Sympathetic nervous discharge creates a burst pattern and influences a lot of physiologic functions. So as we look here, regulation of the afferent sympathetic nervous system, synchronizing and desynchronizing nerve activity, regulation of target organ function, kidneys and sympathetic nervous system, real simple, right? The more sympathetic tone, the less flow. So what do we get? Renal hypertension. Very common in diabetics, right? Diabetics get renal hypertension because they make a lot of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and now they don't get blood flow to the kidneys, and now the heart's got to pump harder. And the vasculature is inflamed, and there's also less permeability. Interestingly, you can adjust for blood pressure. I don't think I have a slide on this, but this is super important for you guys. You can adjust for blood pressure, lipids, and blood sugar in an individual with drugs, okay? And everybody goes, wow, they're going to live a long time. If the pH of their urine is acidotic, they will continue to progress with endothelial dysfunction, heart rate variability disturbances, and renovascular complications. So as long as their pH of their urine is acidic, they continue on their damage, right? Because by default, pH dictates how oxidative you are, right? There isn't anybody that comes into my office that doesn't get a urine and salivary pH. And yeah, I want them to do it first thing in the morning to be exact, but I love it if they come right in after they drank a coffee or they drank their 4th Red Bull. I love that because they spit on the paper and it doesn't even change, right? It's like, wow, you're pretty acidic, right? And there's a little problem with being acidic. You have to eat vegetables to get your way out of it. Or you could drink green drinks that happen to be loaded with pineapple juice that people think are green because they spit a little bit of spinach in it, whatever. But the point being is the only way you're going to get somebody to be out of an acidotic shift is to get their potassium and magnesium balance. So another quick just thought, because I gave you guys a lot of slides, I know, but I want to make sure you get these simple pearls. If they have a serum potassium below 4 or 5, they have a 4-fold risk of being diabetic. And I'm not giving you this stuff anecdotally. For 18 years, all of my grad students had to do little things like tell me everything about when a marker goes below a certain point and starts to trigger a disease state risk. And then I built that into algorithms, right? That's how you do it. Where's the evidence for every point over 84 equals a 6% risk of being diabetic? Once you're below a 4 or 5 potassium, you have a 4-fold risk of developing diabetes. And there's all kinds of those, algorithms that are kind of cool. So, altering efferent sympathetic nervous system drive leads to regulation of the central sympathetic neural circuits and target organ responses. That's exactly right. So we got to get people out of sympathetic dominance. It's pretty crazy. Now, think about this, guys. I don't know what I did before I got this watch because I didn't realize I didn't breathe. Seriously? I need a watch to tell me to breathe? Think about that. Luckily for me, I had, 15 years of Tai Chi and Qigong. So, I kind of learned how to breathe, and that was good because the instructor beat it out of me. He's like, you're going to learn how to breathe, right? But in general, people don't breathe. And if they don't breathe, if they're shallow breathers, what's going to happen to their nervous system? They're going to be sympathetic dominant. And if you're sympathetic dominant, you're a shallow breather. But what's it do to your chemistry? What's shallow breathing do? What does it shift? What chemical does it shift in your body? What does it do to the pH? You become more acidic, and why? Because you make more lactate, right? You're not getting as much oxygen, so you end up with more lactate. And that lactate actually leads to things like anxiety, and they've proven that. So shallow breathing begets more anxiety, begets more perseveration, begets more inability to sleep. So I don't try to get people to meditate for 30 minutes because most people can't sit still for 5 minutes. So the point being is I just try to get people to box breathe for 3 minutes twice a day. You guys know box breathing, right? 4 seconds in, hold 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, hold 4 seconds. I don't make them do Wim Hof. I don't make them, I don't make, you got to do yoga every day or whatever. I would love it. Honestly, I would love people to embrace lifestyle, but I got to make little changes in them. And what I find is I can be pretty effective at even them doing like an app like Inner Balance. If you guys are familiar with Inner Balance and the use of heart rate variability with Inner Balance, just if I get them to do that 3 minutes to 5 minutes twice a day. I got POTS people that I'm correcting by doing that and combining that with my work biochemically on people, right? But they'll say to you, oh my God, I can't believe how much better I feel with breathing. Yeah, breathing. It's kind of weird. We're supposed to do it. Breathing's good. I remember, because I think breathing's so central. I remember I was back in I got to tell you this story. I can't help it. 1984, I start going out speaking about this stuff. 1984, all right? Where do you think you go in 1984 to speak about these things when you're in Cincinnati, Ohio? Crystal fairs. New age events. Nobody else wants you to talk about health at 84, right? My professors are going, you're crazy. My colleagues at the university. So I remember a guy got up and said, this is what I kind of want to make sure I get this point, and I know it's going to be a little early because I'll keep going, but this is a super important point. A guy got up in front of everybody and goes, you can will yourself to do anything. Power of the mind overcomes the body. I went, wow. I'm just telling you guys, I'm a bricklayer. I'm a very simple guy. I think about things, in complex ways, but how do we get to the next step? And I raised my hand, and it was pretty unpopular, I think, because the crowd reaction to me wasn't so favorable. I don't know why, because I said, hey, I got this great idea. I'm going to tape your mouth shut with duct tape, and I'm going to tape your nose shut too, and you're going to will yourself to breathe through your ears. Nobody got the point. I thought I was being kind of gentle. I was just trying to make a point, right? I kind of learned to be more sophisticated in my points after that because, boy, I wasn't a very popular guy. My point is that sometimes we try to create very complex models for people to follow, and all we really need to do is, don't put the duct tape on their mouth and their nose, and let's teach them to breathe and teach them how to sleep and make sure we understand where their chemistry is at and not just throw at them this spaghetti, this 400 markers that you're throwing at people, and you're writing little notes, and you think they're really excited about everything you just told them. Just remember, they remember about 20% of what you told them in the first 6 minutes. After that, they don't remember anything. Just because where their brain is to start, okay? So please, remember my duct tape story. It's kind of important. This is kind of an important one, too, because I talk about, remember how I said cholinergic agonists inhibit cytokine synthesis and protect against cytokine-mediated inflammation? This is giving choline. You could think of huperzine A. You could think of giving adaptogens that will upregulate cholinergic drive, right, because it's down-regulating sympathetic tone. So if you think of giving things like theanine, which will help to a certain extent, if you think of the branded raw ingredient, Rolora, or giving Honeikol B, if you want to give an isolated extract out of magnolia, you can think of giving things that will down-regulate sympathetic dominance. That's adaptogens, the most valuable botanical since the beginning of time in every known medicinal culture, right? Adaptogens have been the most valued botanical since the beginning of time in every known culture. I don't care what culture you go across, whether it's cordyceps in China, right? Ashwagandha, Siberian ginseng, American ginseng, right? Adaptogens have been revered as the thing that keeps you healthy. Why? Because they keep you adapting to stress. The adaptogens of the 21st century in North America, Xanax, Valium, Zoloft, Prozac. We wait till your nervous system breaks. We don't teach you that you need to use adaptogens to stay strong. We wait till you break, right? And that's why we got to get that corrected. And of course, the vagus nerve I already talked about. It's just incredibly important that you think about vagal tone. By the time somebody has vagal tone issues, if you measure them, they're really messed up. We need to be catching them long before their vagus nerve starts messing up on them, right? Start looking at morning and night blood pressures, looking at their heart rate, and try to correct early. Correct early before the problems hit. Tell them to tone down their training. No, I know you're 62 years old, you're a former CEO, but you don't need to get your heart rate up to 205 when you go to Orange Theory. This is what I see. Guys, I'm giving you examples of what happens. This is just an executive coming in, a woman executive coming in. Sold her company. She's like a tigress, okay. She's like this. She's coming in because she has arrhythmias and she can't sleep. She shows me her little chart. I go, what's this? This 203 heart rate. Oh, yeah, I love being in the red. I'm going to win. I want to be the best 63-year-old at the group. That's not winning. That's called figuring a way to check out quick. So heart rate variability, incredibly important. I mean, once again, all I'm trying to do is get across to you guys, look at, recovery heart rates, look at resting heart rates, think of how people are doing. This is kind of the model I look at all the time, right? This is kind of it. Gut. So as stress starts to play itself out, we begin to get food antigens. We start to upregulate the IDO pathway, right? The 2,3-indolamine pathway that creates more quinolinate, more quinuric acid, more neurodegenerative disorders, more lipopolysaccharide. The brain creates more neuroexcitation, more neurodegeneration. The structural plasticity starts to change. I get less pliability in my structural capacity for signaling the brain. Elevations or alterations in cortisol, NMDA goes up. reduced neuroplasticity, and then, of course, imbalances in sympathetic and parasympathetic tone. And, of course, the immune system is following with a innate and adaptive change in our immune system, and then glial cell activation in the brain. And in the end, I just summarized for you in one slide really what I wasted about the last hour talking about, which is, in the end, these are the shifts that we're looking at. Where is the person? What I tend to do is fit people into these models. Hey, this is where you're at. This is where I think you're going. Or, man, this is where you're at, and we got to get to work, right? And so what happens? What's the pathology? More depression, more anxiety, more interrupted sleep, persistent fatigue and brain fog, known autoimmune disease, impaired immune function, bloating, gas, stomach distension, alternating constipation, diarrhea, IBS. This is that gut immune-brain interface that occurs. And it can start with, oh, I've been on a drug that induced my lipopolysaccharide, so I'm on a NSAID. 25% of the drugs on the market right now are called, I just wrote a little ebook on this, drug-induced microbiome disruption. A lot of you guys, maybe none of you know, but we wrote a lot of the databases on drug-induced nutrient depletion. So a lot of databases that you guys might be searching on drug-induced nutrient depletion, my team put together. We started pioneering that work in the 80s. So the new one is drug-induced microbiome disruption. And it's not just the fact that it's an antibiotic, guys. Metformin disrupts your microbiome. And everybody loves metformin. Oh, the ultimate anti-aging drug. Unless it disrupts your microbiome and gives you diarrhea and causes you to get, a dysfunctional microbiome, then I guess it's not the ultimate anti-aging drug. Good drug. I'm not against metformin, by the way. I think it is a good drug. But you need to understand, well, what's it doing? Same thing. Statins, same thing. Antidepressants, same thing. So it's not just the NSAIDs, the PPIs, the corticosteroids, the oral contraceptives, right? The antibiotics, the chemotherapeutic agents that are being used now to treat other diseases and conditions, right? Wait, did I miss any drugs that are actually out on the market now? Well, I guess I didn't. And then, of course, what is the progressions that you see if you're measuring things? Elevated liver enzymes. They started getting non-alcoholic fatty liver. I had a perfect guy come in. This guy drives into my office the other day, pulls up in a convertible Rolls Royce, Wow, right? Nice guy, actually. I mean, former veteran, super nice guy. Very successful, so God bless him. But, ketogenic. Ketogenic with triglycerides of 700. His lipase is triple normal. He's getting ready to have a nice little bout of pancreatitis because, nobody ever told him that, shooting guns for 30 years and breathing in lead was going to be a problem for his brain, and which would then create a problem in his gut, right? So elevated liver enzymes, bilirubin, diamine oxidase can go down, LPS can go up, melanocyte-stimulating hormone goes down, right? So as melanocyte-stimulating hormone goes down, characteristic of kind of the biotoxin world and the Lyme world. Acetaldehyde elevation, characteristic of people that are yeasty, right? The higher your yeast, the more acetaldehyde you make, the more acetaldehyde you make, the more you damage your liver. And I don't know how much of you even have read up on acetaldehyde, but you should if you haven't. I mean, there's lots of papers on it. And probably the most damaging thing about acetaldehyde is it knocks out, you start to depress your acetaldehyde enzymes, your dehydrogenase. And that means that in your brain what happens is you stop making serotonin and dopamine, and you make beta-carboline and salsolinol. So you're making phenols in your brain instead of neurotransmitters. And then when you combine that with the IDO pathway being depressed, when you're making kenurenic acids and making quinolates, guess what's happening in the brain? You no longer have neurotransmitters. You have phenols and organic compounds in your brain to run your brain. Gee, I wonder why so many people are depressed and anxious and can't figure a way how to think straight, right? So this is just a kind of a, I don't know, for me, a simple way to go, hey, what goes wrong when these happen, and how many of these things do you have wrong, right? Then we look at the immune system, and of course you can see things like elevated CRP, ESR up, IL-6 or TNF-alpha, different markers of autoimmunity. Look at MMP9, right? There's all those kind of cool markers you can look at. And then looking at things like measurable toxins, like my guy that was at the gunsmith. I mean, I had another guy come in the other day. He lives in Ecuador. 44 micrograms per milliliter mercury in his blood. Not challenged. What does he do? He buys fresh tuna and eats a whole tuna about every third day in Ecuador. He's living on the beach in Ecuador. I'm not talking about picking it up at Fukushima, which would be different. That'd be cesium-143. But anyway. My point being is looking at measurable toxins. And, of course, here are the shifts, right? Metalloproteinases 3 and 9 for connective tissue and inflammatory disorders. C3 and C4a alterations for the innate immune system. Looking at TGF-beta-1. Looking at alterations in your CD4 and CD25s. And just, D-dimer, for example, in fibrinogen. One of the most simple ones is elevated white blood cell counts, guys. When you see somebody with an elevated uric acid, elevated fibrinogen, and an elevated white blood cell count, you know they are super chronically inflamed. So if they're trending high on their urate and they're trending high on their white blood cells, so let's say fourth quartile, not even out of bounds, fourth quartile, right? And their fibrinogen is out of bounds, they're really metabolically inflamed. They've got a lot of metabolic kind of catabolic processes going on in their body. Obviously, what are diagnostic? Not they're clues, right? Look at resting heart rate. I already told you this stuff. Look at percentage of free testosterone, where you're at. What's your heart rate response? What's your body fat look like? Are you breaking down? Are you catabolic or not? And remember, just, train within reason. I've only got a couple of minutes. Cortisol, this is just interesting. Here's a great study. Look, these are cyclists. Look, the longer they train, look how their cortisol goes up. The harder people train. What did you learn? That's kilometers per week. Kilometers per week. All right? So the more people train, what I tell you at the beginning of the talk, remember, the only difference between a non-exerciser and an exerciser many times is the way they look. It doesn't mean that they're in any less trouble just because they look a little nicer in their workout outfits. I'm saying that with compassion. I'm sure in this case, I'm trying to drive home a point. I don't think we take people who supposedly look good seriously enough for how sick they're about to become, because we assume just because they're, you're thinner, you're okay, right? You got to do a thorough evaluation of everybody and understand where that metabolic inflammation, remember the term meta-inflammation. And, you guys are going to go all through this whole cortisol thing. Just remember, diurnal patterns are needed, and you don't want flattened cortisol curves. You want a nice diurnal pattern. And, of course, the cardio study showed that when you flatten your cortisol curve, you have a 333% more likeliness toward coronary calcification. So flattening of the curve is every bit as important of how high or how low or how you're metabolizing it. Just look at the curve. It's been published multiple times. Just on cortisol, as the curve flattens, it becomes a metabolic issue.